Just 2 days, a trigger law in Texas will make it significantly more dangerous to get or perform an abortion in that state. The near total ban on abortions will go into effect on Thursday with no exception for rape or incest. If a doctor is caught performing the procedure, he or she could face life in prison and a fine of up to $100,000. Joining us now, Texas Democratic nominee for governor, Beto O'Rourke. He is author of a new book out today titled "We've Got to Try: How the Fight for Voting Rights Makes Everything Else Possible." Good morning. We'll talk to you about the book in just a second, but curious to your take on this trigger law that's going to go in effect in a couple of days that truly is extreme if it has no exceptions for rape or incest. What do you propose to do about that if you're elected governor?
These two issues are definitely connected. If you have a vibrant, thriving democracy where the right to vote is respected, you do not end up with a total abortion ban with no exception for rape or incest in a state that has one of the highest levels of maternal mortality, 3 times as deadly for Black women in the country, in the developed world for that matter. Same is true for our public schools, our failing grid, 13 weeks after Uvalde and no action from this governor. So turning out to vote and winning this election in November is the first order of business. And then ensuring that every woman in the state of Texas can make her own decisions about her own body and her own future is a thing that we've got to be focused on, working with Democrats, Republicans, independents, the people of Texas, and making sure that women here lead the way, as they did in 1973. Jane Roe, of course, a Texas woman, as were her 2 attorneys, Sarah Weddington and Linda Coffey, who successfully prevailed upon an all-male United States Supreme Court to win protection for that right to privacy, to make these very personal and sometimes painful decisions. The women of Texas won that right 50 years ago. The women of Texas will win it back in 2022.
And that trigger law would impose a fine of $100,000 and a long prison sentence for any physician who performs an abortion, going into effect on Thursday. You mentioned the sort of nexus of these two issues with abortion rights and voting rights. That's the subject of your book, We've Got to Try. We've just been talking this morning about the salience of the preserving democracy effectively as a voting issue. Why do you think that's so critical right now?
I'm confident that when people can vote and express their desires, the opportunities that they see, work on the problems that they have in their communities, we're going to be a much better state and a better country for it. But when you lock up people or lock them outside of this democracy, as you've done in Texas, 7 million who were eligible to vote did not cast a ballot in 2020 right here in Texas, not because they're lazy, not for any lack of love of democracy, but because Greg Abbott and the Republican legislature have made this the toughest state in the nation, bar none, in which to cast a ballot or register to vote. You get these outcomes. So I looked back to Texas history, to people like Lawrence Nixon, who successfully fought against the white primary, which existed from 1923 to 1944, and whose signal Supreme Court victory set the path for LBJ's Voting Rights Act of 1965 and Barbara Jordan's extension of that in 1975. In other words, Willie, not only can we overcome this current attack on democracy, we've done it before against much larger odds. But it's going to take all of us doing all we can with what we have, where we are right here in Texas. And again, first order of business, winning this election in November.
Mr. O'Rourke, it's Katty Kay here. Can I talk to you about Hispanic voters in Texas? It's a group that Democrats have seen some signs over the last few months that the Republicans have actually had some successes nominating Hispanic candidates, particularly Hispanic women. What are you doing to try to reach out to Hispanic voters? There's always, what I hear from Hispanic voters is Democrats come to us every 4 years. They talk to us where they think we should be, but Republicans are talking to us where we actually are. What are you doing, particularly on these issues of abortion and gun rights, to try to make sure that Hispanic voters feel that their vote is not being taken for granted by you as a Democrat?
Katty, if the great sin committed by the Republican Party was to disenfranchise voters based on race or their ethnicity, then the one committed by Democrats has been to take those same voters for granted, to say, look, if you're Black or you're brown, you're likely going to vote for us, and so we don't need to spend time listening to you, learning from you, delivering for you. And I think what we're seeing in South Texas, or what we saw in 2020, is a reflection of that. But we are there literally all the time. I'm going to be making my 7th visit to Brownsville and Edinburgh on the 1st of September. But we're also showing up in Harris County and Dallas County and places that you might not have heard of, like Madisonville and Greenville and Quanah and Dumas, going to every single part of this state to make sure that no one is taken for granted and no one is written off, and making sure that I listen as much as I speak. And when I do that, I hear that economic concerns in a state where the minimum wage is still $7.25 an hour, the ability to see a doctor in a state that's the least insured in the nation, our failing schools because we have a governor who's attacking school teachers in the state of Texas. All of these issues rise to the front. And our agenda of raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, expanding Medicaid, of supporting our school teachers, our counselors, our librarians, making sure that they don't have to work 2 or 3 jobs so they can focus on just that one important job, connecting with that kid in that classroom, that is resonating across the state. It's showing up in polling, Caddy, that shows us not only outperforming Greg Abbott amongst Hispanic voters, but outperforming how any Democrat has done in recent history. And so we're not going to take that for granted. We're going to show up, do the work, connect with the people that we want to serve.
And a great concern, as you know well, for Hispanic voters, but voters across the state of Texas, because they live on the border, is what's happening down there right now. A new record was set this year already, this fiscal year, which ends at the end of September, for border apprehensions. They're going to cross likely 2 million of them, breaking last year's record. Border agents are absolutely overwhelmed. Governor Abbott is sending buses full of migrants to New York City and to Washington, D.C. to make a point about the crisis there. What do you propose to do? First of all, do you agree it's a crisis? And second of all, how do you change the tide of what's happening down there?
We need solutions. We've had years of stunts. Greg Abbott's been governor for more than 7 years, and this is where we find ourselves now, busing migrants to New York or D.C., involuntarily activating 10,000 members of the Guard, building a few miles of wall. None of that has done a single thing. Here are the solutions, and these come from Texans from across the state. 1, a Texas-based guest worker program, so that if you want to come and work in our state and you live in another country, we want to make sure there is a legal, safe, and orderly path for you to do that. If you're going to come here, you've got to follow the law. We're going to make sure that we update our laws, which have not been updated since Ronald Reagan was the president of the United States. I want to do the same for those who want to unify with their families or seek asylum in this country. Right now, they're waiting 6 years for their claim to be adjudicated. Let's go for 6 weeks. And if you pass that bar, welcome to America. And if you don't, you must return to your country of origin. We do that, we can focus on those who want to do us harm, trafficking fentanyl or trafficking in human beings. Right now, they're needles in a haystack. We get rid of that haystack with a safe, legal, orderly path to enter this country. We can focus on those who would do us harm. Those are solutions, and these solutions come from the people of Texas.
The new book is titled "We've Got to Try: How the Fight for Voting Rights Makes Everything Else Possible." Democratic nominee for Texas Governor Beto O'Rourke, thanks for being here. We appreciate it.